Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on your screen on this lovely world. Today, I have the pleasure to welcome Michael Fauscette from Arian Research. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Ralph. Great to be here.
It is.
Again, I should say.
Yeah, we had some fabulous shows already together with Michael, and we were just chit-chatting on the aspect that he was one of the earliest guests we had on the AI topic starting in 2024, before we had our fabulous duo of Dr. Michael Wu and John the Brohammer Reed, who is smashing the scene and crashing one or the other conversation if he has an opportunity. So, John, if you have time, feel free to add your comments. We would like to encourage you to share your thoughts with us on one of the streaming channels. We have plenty in Facebook, LinkedIn, and the live theater from Thomas Wibbenite, who is now on tour to check in some lovely waters if there is the boat he would like to buy in and have some extra experience on sailing. He and his wife are big sailors under the surf and under the sun, and I admire this fantastic shared hobby, and that it's a way of life Thomas would like to go forward. And it looks like with moving to Charleston, also the topic of getting a boat is getting closer. So we cross our fingers and think about having a good time in checking up with the boat. Now, we have chosen a topic, and why have we chosen to invite Michael? He has a lot of experience in that area, and does the introduction of Agentic AI requires different strategies than other types of automation than we have seen before? It will be one of the questions we will go for. Michael has a certain well-known reputation as a founder, CEO, and chief analyst at Arian Research. And we have had a talk during Corona where we have these game and time-changing aspects. And one of these game and time-changing aspects was that he was founding also Arian Research. So a global advisory firm is specializing in AI, cloud technologies, and digital transformation. Michael is a seasoned high-tech leader, board chairman, and software industry analyst with decades of experience shaping the future of enterprise software. Before founding Arian Research, he served as chief research officer at G2, where he helped buyers navigate the software landscape using crowdsourced insights. He also led IDC's worldwide enterprise software research group for nearly a decade, and held executive roles at major software companies, including Autodesk and PeopleSoft, and well as several VC-backed startups. I could continue a little further, but it is always fascinating to see that one in other times could have met already on an IDC event, or being a big fan on the CRM end of PeopleSoft and the former Ventive they have purchased. We could have met earlier, but unfortunately, the real trigger was that we do a lot more in online. Having said that, what did I forget in your introduction?
I feel honored. I think that was probably better than most. So I'm impressed with me today. Thank you.
I'm very happy that you appreciate the introduction. So let's go forward in just starting with the introduction of Agentic AI after the large language models was also something coming around the corner speedy and surprise, and with a lot of side effects. People thinking that they no longer need their standard workforce could replace service agents, call center agents, salespeople. I'm just frustrated that people like the guy from the Blue Cloud is not going for an CEO bot and going more time to Hawaii. So honestly asking, is there a different strategy than other types of automation that we have seen before, Michael?
Yeah, and I suspect some of those CEOs are already replacing themselves with those CEO bots. We just don't know it yet. So, at least according to the business performance of some of them. Anyway,
That is a
um,
very fair aspect. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Going
Well,
down with high
it-
speed through to automation is an interesting aspect.
yeah, it is. And the thing is, this evolution's been like head spinning in a lot of ways, right? We had the advent of this generative AI stuff, and it was cool, and it does some interesting assistive things. But the truth is, it didn't do things on its own. It just helped us do things. And and I think, over time, the realization that, well, if you take this a step further, you can actually start to build things that can in a very different way start to provide. I almost hate to even use the word automation, but automation across a lot of different processes. And I actually I try to use, and one of the things, I mentioned the Agentic AI book coming out next week. The
Yeah.
title says a lot about where I think this goes, and that is building the digital workforce. And I believe that that's how we have to start to shift the way we think about this. So if you think about traditional automation, RPA, and even before that, BPM, and all the other sort of
Mhm.
automation-y things we've talked about for years, if you think about that, that was really based on predetermined rules. It
Yeah.
was defined in very narrow boundaries. So you
Mhm.
could automate invoice processing, you could automate some data entry, you could automate a very specific, you know, routine workflow that was very repetitive. It's straightforward. It does good stuff. It's not a bad thing. It gets rid of
Yeah.
stuff you didn't want to do. I'm happy with that. I mean, that's good. But the difference is, if you start to move towards agentic, first of all, you're talking about agents that are goal based versus task based, and that's a real interesting shift. And
Mhm.
so, in traditional automation, you go, what task can I get rid of? And at Agentic, you're asking, what outcomes do I want to achieve? How can human and digital workers collaborate to work
Yeah.
together? And so I think, that's simple shift in thinking. If you start to think about this as a new hybrid workforce, digital workforce, human workforce working together, then you start to realize that you can approach this differently. And with an agent that has the capability to perceive, so it can see stuff, it can know stuff is happening. That's important. It can then plan, so it can take the input of what it perceived and think about, what do I do with this? Then it can take that action, and beyond that, it can learn. So each time it iterates, it learns more. So it's goal oriented, and it's not constrained inside of those narrow boundaries. Now, it needs to be constrained, and we'll talk about that later. I know there are certain constraints that
Yeah.
we're working through over time, but if you started to, like for the book, I did a survey, and I'll pepper through a bit of data in here. But one of the ones that's interesting is that 71% of the organizations I surveyed, and it was like a 450 responses.
Mhm.
It's and most of them, executive level, director and above. 71% viewed agentic AI as essential for competitive positioning.
Wow.
71%. And I'll take that one step further. 89.1% have already done something in beginning an AI, agentic AI, not AI, but agentic AI journey. So
Yeah.
that could be planning all the way through implementation, and in those implementations, different degrees, right? Departmental versus enterprise wide. And out of those, almost 50% had already built agentic AI systems that were in production. So we're not as a lot of people talk about this as hype, and there's been hype around it, and frankly, some of that hype comes from generative AI, not from agentic. But the strategy is starting to take effect. Don't just replace and reduce, start to augment and enhance your workforce.
That is a very interesting take, and I would like to emphasize that after the show, I'm more than happy to drop a note where you can, after you have digested some of the information and have gotten the taste for more, we love to share where you can buy the book. Coming back to the aspect, I was co-working as a colleague and associated analyst with the BARC in Würzburg. And one of the creations was the approach of the digital workplace.
Mm-hmm.
The digital workplace included a lot of the aspects which brought the typical office worker and the roles and the integration of a lot of solution setups to do an outcome-based customer journey or CX approach. Mm-hmm. Now, how does the Agentic AI approach on the digital workplace add or complicate the digital transformation approach of an organization? Where is, to say so, the beef in the mindset and preparation of these exercises, as a lot of organizations, small, middle, large, have not managed yet their digital transformation and are jumping directly into the pool of Agentic AI?
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of interplay with the idea of digital transformation. The one sort of mental shift that I think people need to make in this is moving from the idea in digital transformation, digital workplace, all those things. It was humans applying tools to a problem.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not a bad thing, right? That's a good thing. That is it provides good outcomes if you implement it correctly, just like everything else. But the difference is if you start to think about agentic AI and how you're going to approach that, it's not in the same way. They're not tools. Tools are things you use to provide a very specific outcome. And the difference with agentic is that it's a coworker. It's a collaborative coworker that you should approach in a way that says, I know I can assign goals, outcomes to this agent, and the agent with governance, with certain ethics rules, with the right supervision, with the right incentives, the right oversight, all those things, all the things you think of when you say, I'm going to hire a new worker, I'm going to hire a new digital worker. What does that mean? It means I need to know how much autonomy is it going to have in this process? What's the role of humans in the process? Are they approval? Are they oversight? Are they supervision? Where do they fall? And then lastly, and the one that I think a lot of companies miss until they really need it and it's too late, how does it fail? And that's the third place, because you have the same thing for people right now, right? People fail sometimes. So same thing with digital workers. The outcome's not what you wanted. So you have to know, how does it fail? And then how do you correct that? Do you stop and fall back? Do you continue with oversight? There's different ways to think about it. But to me, that's the biggest change in the way you think about it. From digital transformation, I'm applying digital tools, to this new agentic transformation, which I now have a hybrid workforce and I can assign both digital and human workers to do things. Now, I will say that part of the challenge is that it is incumbent when you do an automation project, you don't have the same level of involvement from all the employees in a department. The people that are very specific to this task, they're involved, and maybe it does replace some of their work, or in some cases all their work, but that's very narrow. When you talk about adding more workers to your workforce, digital or human, that involves everybody, because I need to know how to collaborate. What does it mean to oversee a digital worker? Or frankly, soon, what does it mean to be overseen by a digital worker? Because that's going to come too, right? But the skills gap is a real issue, and it was the biggest in a survey we did. It was the second biggest implementation challenge at 42%, which is pretty big, right? And so employees have to understand how to collaborate with digital workers. That's not an inherent skill, because again, we default to it's a software tool, and it's not. It's a coworker.
And that is a very important aspect, because I learn, I make mistakes, I fail, and I stand up, I walk again, and I'll try to learn out of my mistakes. So does hopefully the agentic colleague of mine.
Sure.
If he makes a really big mistake and we get into trouble with our customer, we have to check for who is responsible and who is liable.
Yes. Yeah. And that, I mean, that's an issue that has to be defined. And that's one of many of those, ideas of involving people and building out this whole capability that's collaborative. How do we, how do we establish responsibility and accountability? Now,
Yeah,
you could have the agent responsible, but are they accountable? It depends on the process. And then where are the humans accountable? Are they accountable? Human oversight? Is human in the loop? Human approval? All
yeah,
those different things you've defined. Remember the three things:
yeah,
autonomy, human involvement, failure mode. So if you think of those, that means that the agent is enabled, and yet it has a supervisor the definition that is certainly responsible and accountable. So the agent could be responsible, and then you have developers that were involved in this process at some point in time. And I'd say that it depends on the specific instance whether there's some accountability responsibility that goes all the way back, because it could be a simple bug, a flaw that needs to be corrected in the code, and it would then function correctly. So it's not as straightforward. But then, I don't know, you think about responsibility, accountability for just human workers. That's always a bit of a complicated discussion. Did you do that? Why did you do that? How did you do that? And if you think it's the same thing with a digital worker, how did you do that? And that can be a real question, right? What's transparency is really important, but sometimes the things that are done aren't as transparent as you want them. So you've got to have the capability, this idea of reasoning and being able to watch that as it executes task, and then also following up on those, making sure that you are getting the outcomes that you want.
So I like the approach you have taken, that guided and supported co-working is one thing. And I'm quite sure that this is with an insurance company to secure you about the liabilities, a completely different story than insuring a artificial intelligence or an agentic worker for probable mistakes he could make and where you get sued for. So in Germany, you definitely find insurance companies which either say, no, thank you, we are not interested in that business, or charge you in the moment 4 times they would charge if you are a human being, because they see a high risk. And I believe that your approach would be a smart move to lower the risk and get them the confidence that human in the loop and supervision and supported guidance is the name of the game.
Yeah.
What is the impact of involving employees in creating and executing agentic AI strategies? As the co-working aspect you mentioned already, but how do we properly make it happen?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the failures that I've seen from businesses that have had issues, and one of the successes I've seen from those companies that have done well when they did this, right? So what
Okay.
do you get if you I mean, surprise, right? What do you get when you do this as a co-creative idea, or a complete hybrid workforce idea? Well, you get better system design, first of all, because you involve the people who actually did the work before, and they understand it, so they can
Yeah.
understand what the exceptions are, what the context is, what top down design sometimes misses is bottom up. And so that combines both. And that's really important. You also get something that, you know, right now there's so much hype and there's a lot of fear in the workforce about, oh no, what's this age? Is this agent going to replace me? Is it going to, take my job, or is it going to change my job? And so if you involve your workforce all the way through, you can reduce that resistance, you can increase adoption. And in our survey, change management and employee resistance ranked much lower But when it occurs, it's usually because people feel like the AI has done something to them instead of with them. And I think that's a big shift mentally. And then the other is build internal capability faster, right? So you want your whole organization to evolve. And if they evolve together, the employees are involved and your digital workers are involved, and you get these systems that perform, that give you much better outcomes. And then you also develop these internal champions, and there's centers of excellence, center of expertise that you can pull in. So you get all of that tied together with the workforce versus an us and them kind of a problem. I mean, it is sort of like, you buy I won't use the company name, but I can think of a good example of a large software company that bought a technology, an operating system technology that was competing with one of their own. And instead of consolidating them, they left them as competing. And eventually the one consumed and crushed the other because it was a competition. And that's not what we want, right? What we want is collaboration, cooperation, as we start to take the organization to a new place.
And that is exactly what I honestly like in the approach you are describing. You raise the bar in a positive way for better outcomes, and better outcomes for organizations, better outcomes for employees, and even more, as I'm a CRM guy, old school, and CX fan, that it is a benefit for the customer from the outcome perspective. So that is very interesting. What I see is, what I don't like is that people have nice words like the boomerang effect, or that they love their ohana. But I have more the feeling kicking ass is the new style of some people thinking about family life, especially if they take the word from ohana. Yeah, and everybody will know who I'm addressing. Yeah, the evangelist of CRM walking around, wandering and having his dreams. Sometimes I would like to have him experience some nightmares, because the aspects he's going for is even easier layoffs can be managed, and then raising some. I pick some to be in the team again, just to kick him half a year later in the ass as well. So I want to go into detail, being specific. What has Salesforce done right or wrong about the recent layoff of 4,000 people and more in some lower areas, in regions of Washington or in Ireland, in their call centers? And also Oracle did lay off people too, just without a backlash. And also I'm observing that either financing the co-piloting is costing Microsoft also a little fortune, and they prefer to lay off workforce as well. So what is your take on that one? And we go in the positive after that, what could be the countermeasure.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, again, there's, I guess, first of all, you should say there is some reality involved in this. I mean, let's go back to the Industrial Revolution, when we moved from craft industries to, industrial based operations that changed people's roles and moved from agrarian to, city and urban growth and automation, all those things, right? I mean, that even though you go, look, we have all this new opportunity, and we do, and the same is going to be true in the world of adding agentic AI, building a hybrid workforce. There is a lot of opportunity, but there's certain underneath reality that says there are certain types of functions that you aren't going to need. Now, the way that I've seen this position varies greatly, and the backlash, I think, has a lot to do with the way those things were communicated. It's about a disconnect, really. So Salesforce promotes AI capabilities, agentic AI capabilities, and then they reduce their workforce. Well, I mean, that could very well be a reasonable thing if you had laid this out in a very different way. But the way it was laid out, it almost seems like it was oh, look, we automated all these things. Now we don't need these people. And that's not really the message that we were looking for. When we see similar transitions, companies talk about reskilling, redeployment, role evaluation rather than replacement. So it doesn't mean that you might not reduce the total number of headcount, but you're replacing headcount with digital headcount. But there's also should be more of that message that says it's a transformation, not a reduction. And that, I think, is where we saw these things kind of break down. And again, I don't want to, let's don't be naive. I mean, there are certain jobs that aren't going to be viable in the future. And there are certain jobs that are going to change dramatically as we get further down this path. But we're still new at this. We're still learning. And so we need to invest in employees, help them learn new ways of working versus just, I'm going to automate them out of existence. If you had this strategic planning, consolidated planning that talked about the whole workforce evolution, and you went down that line, you laid it out that way, I think it's a much more understandable story. When it's very, and this is just more communication than anything, and how often does communication get executives in trouble? Maybe the thought process, if the thought process was laid out differently, I would understand it better, and I would go, okay, well, it's not just about layoffs. What you're talking about is reskilling, redoing, retooling, all these other things that you want to see as you build forward. So to me, that was the real issue. And some companies did it more quietly. Good for them, I guess. I mean, I still would like to know that they had that message around reskilling, upskilling, moving around, retraining, instead of just automation replaces, which is not really how we're trying to think about this.
I would love to hear the story again about getting new perspectives in your work life, getting new qualifications in your life, getting job enrichment properly set it up, getting more outcome for the organization, for the employee, and as at the end of the day for the customer, and benefits you are talking about, and not in laying off people, but getting more benefits realized with the same workforce, with the support of hybrid work. That would be a messaging as a PR agent I would like to deliver. I would like to see and read and feel comfortable and have a positive perspective, and not the layoff blah blah.
Now the only issue that, Ralph, I will say, because I you think about this a lot, we operate in a weird economic world where every company that is public has to perform quarter by quarter. So sometimes the messaging is not for us. The messaging is for Wall Street and for investors. And I think that's a trade-off that you have to be careful with. I understand it, but at the same time, does that really support the overall message you're trying to go forward with, talking to your customers about it, and then set the right example? And while I understand that short-term thinking versus long-term thinking can certainly change the way you message things, I still think there was a better way to message that than was done. That's just me.
The drama, sex, crime, blood, sweat, and tears is always a good messaging and gets attention. But if it's good for your stock exchange course and rate is a second question. And the other question is, aren't there also some advantages of our potential agentic workforce for smaller and medium organizations, typically German Mittelstand or SMBs in the US, where you learn to make with the same workforce a lot of more stuff you can generate. Ask, for instance, Nicolas France, setting up a little restaurant, a coffee shop, and planning for a hotel. And she was used to have, in the old days, a lot of co-working people. Now she has some agentic support, and she has a lot of fantastic tasks she made happen. Yeah. So there are positive examples, or
Sure.
if you go for Lori and ask her what the SMEs are performing, I guess it's like if you go for some Austin place where four letters out of India are creating a lot of positive spirit and value. And I believe that what you describe and I bet describe in more detail in your book are these positive approaches that you checked up.
Yeah.
Can you share
Yeah.
some concrete examples of some good stuff, what you have found in your research?
Sure. Sure. I have a few, and I talk to companies fairly often that are in the process or have gotten already started to see some. I think if you think about first of all having a very clear value focus. So if you focus on the outcomes versus the fact that it's cool technology, the example I'm thinking of is a financial services company that I looked at that had implemented agentic AI for fraud detection, and they had some very clear success metrics, and
Yeah,
they saw a 40% improvement in detection rates while they reduced false positives overall. Now
yeah,
that's a significant metric for a financial services organization, right? Reducing fraud and also reducing false positives at the same time. That's impressive. Or if you think of human AI collaboration, instead of replacing humans, maybe design your workflows where humans and AIs complement each other. Well, this is great in a professional services firm. And the one I'm thinking about created a digital research assistant that
hmm,
could manage information gathering while the humans focused on the analysis and client relationships.
yeah,
So, and to be honest, I use that today when in research all the time. I have several research assistants that go off and pull things on a regular basis, and then some on an ad hoc basis that feed me information that I can use in my research to build out that whole picture. So while the agent might not be defining the actual analysis, the output, it is giving me the inputs that I need to much more effectively operate. So that professional service is a great place to do that. Or iterative capabilities. If you start small and you scale, that seems to work well with agentic. So, and it's worked
mhm,
well with other types of implementations, but this is really true here because you're really trying to build trust inside your organization and bring those employees along. So a manufacturer I talk to pretty regularly, they
mhm,
had started working on predictive maintenance, which predictive maintenance.
mhm,
I'm an old plant maintenance guy from way back. I'm an ex naval officer
yeah,
who was involved in plant maintenance, and I work for what we call EAM now, but it was plant maintenance back then, software. And predictive maintenance, prescriptive maintenance, those things were just the holy grail. We couldn't get there, right? But
yeah,
now we can, and if they, as a manufacturer, they learned the change management lessons slowly inside that initial predictive maintenance implementation. So now they're looking at supply chain optimization or quality control, and
yeah,
and quality controls in a manufacturing environment. Quality controls a really great use case for agentic because you have computer vision. It can perceive, it can decide, and it can take that action, and it can learn from that. That's a really important kind of activity around quality control. And frankly, the agent catches way more QC issues than the humans would because it has that capability to focus in different ways than humans do. And then lastly, I would say, think about in building a foundation. Um, Technical integration, organizational change, all those things are really important. And I talk to companies all the time that really, you know, the failure examples I have mostly tie to humans, not to technology.
mm,
And the good outcomes that I have also mostly tie to humans, not technology. And I think that's a real shift in the way you think about it. And again, not a tool, it's a coworker. Think about it as a coworker, then I'm going to approach this in a really different way. And those foundational capabilities, the data infrastructure, technical integration, organizational change management, all those things are really key to having a successful agentic deployment.
yeah. I take that forward in as you did some own research. It's always interesting to see what on research has been performed on academic approach or on driven by organizations, such as if we analyze that the software vendors have now large teams because they want to get rid of the gardeners of this world, or unfortunately also your services and our services, as they believe they can drive it forward on a neutral base by themselves, which I doubt, but there are interesting outcomes. So into how effective agentic systems can solve issues has been researched by some more or less useful approaches, coming to the conclusion that they are good for simple jobs and not for complex workflows or tasks that involve multiple steps, such as manus or something like the agents which are collecting together work, and they do real flows like we had it before, not on let's say A/B testing and continuous step by step, and you have that workflow and it is automated running down, but that they have a lot of more capabilities. So where do you see limitations, or where would you see that there are no limits?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is that we're in an evolution of capabilities that's changing so quickly that I literally get up every morning and go, okay, what happened last night? I mean, it changes that quickly. And so where are we in that path? We're on a path that'll lead us eventually to much more complex multi-agent systems that can handle, complex workflows, whatever, right? We'll get there. I really do believe that. But today, you really have to think of it, where does agentic excel? It excels at well-defined single domain problems, but more complex multi-step workflows that need human judgment, it's not good at that yet. That's reasonable. So what do? Well, I start with high value problems, yes, but bounded problems. So workflows that they can be complex enough to have real value. So we're not talking about automating data entry anymore, right? It can have something, it can have real value there, but it's bounded enough that it can handle this effectively and establish that pattern of success, which builds trust, and that reinforces your change management efforts, right? Then you can design hybrid workflows. So you can create, if you need to do something that is fairly complex, you can have components that the agents, the digital workers handle that they're good at. And then there are, like information gathering, initial analysis, building standard responses. And then you have humans that handle those parts that require judgment, creativity, relationship management, those kinds of emotional skills, creative skills, judgment. So it could work in a complex environment, but it's both humans and agents working together. And then the other thing I would say is, since I said this, you're building for evolution. You need to think
Yeah.
about this because it's going to get more capable as time goes on. So I'm going to say, here's what I'm doing today. It's explainable, it's transparent. I have, defined all the things I need to do. But here's the roadmap that says, as I get to this capability, I can do these things, and this capability, this thing. So I can focus now on augmentation first, because that's where it's the
Yeah.
most useful, is in collaborative workflows. And so humans can be more effective at complex work using their digital coworker, but eventually I'll get to a way that I can handle much more complex things. So I think that's the whole way I think about it. Is I'm here, I can do these things, it's collaborative. At some point I'll get to places where I do want the agent to go off and handle its own thing, and it maybe doesn't have human oversight. Maybe it's only humans managing outcomes or goals. But today I want that collaborative effort, because I think that's the most effective, unless it's a fairly straightforward workflow that I know I can turn over to an agent today.
That's cool. What have you found in your surveys which were disappointing and frustrating, and on the other side, which were encouraging and giving you optimism?
That's interesting too. I mean, I think finding that we have moved so quickly, that
Yeah,
number I gave you, the
yeah,
80% see a fundamental transformation in 5 years, 71% say it's essential. I think those are positive, but
hmm,
but I think that we tend to think of the timeline as much longer, and what I'm starting to see is that timeline actually is much more compressed. So, like I was answering a thought leadership question for a organization I do some work with, and one of their questions had to do with that timeline, right? And it was like by
right.
2030, blah blah blah. And I go, look, it according to the survey, 49% of organizations in the US have production digital workers. Then it's not 2030 we're talking about.
Yeah,
It's 2025 we're talking about, and 2026 and 2027,
yeah,
because things are evolving so quickly. So that, to me, that was that was important. Then on the opposite side, when you talk about economic divide, organizations are really struggling with what? Organizational integration complexity. So I
yeah,
want the agent to be able to use tools, so I have to integrate across different vendor provided solutions, maybe
yeah,
even across firewalls. And nearly 50% listed or technical integration complexity as a barrier. And then I mentioned skills gap. That was the number two barrier at 42%, right? So execution barriers, because it could be overcome in a successful implementation, but today the skills gap are preventing a lot of companies from being able to get there. And taking that tool-based approach leads them down a path that is much more prone to failure. So moving towards that hybrid workflow, I think, is the way to get past that, because then we can start to address those skills gaps. And it's not just technical skills gaps; it's also awareness and understanding, like how do I engineer a prompt? How do I collaborate? How do I
yeah,
use, what systems do I use to collaborate? How do the agents collaborate with each other? How do they collaborate with humans? So all those things have to be defined as you're going through this implementation. So I think, to me, that it is, I'm excited by the opportunity and how quickly it's moving, and
yeah,
I'm scared because it's getting so much traction that we've seen studies that talk about the failure rates. Well, it was funny. I know one of the analyst firms that I won't mention put out something like, 40% of the agentic AI implementations are going to fail by next year. And my answer to that was, yeah. And how many IT implementations of any kind fail every year? 60%. So in fact, we're 20% better. Like, I mean, that wasn't a negative, it was a positive. Like, come on, be
yeah,
excited. No, and I don't want to be flip about that, because obviously it's an issue, but at the same time, I think we're overanalyzing around that. Let's simply
yeah.
use this idea of start small, find the right workflows, find the right use cases, do that in a change management, employee enabled way, and then I can build on success and grow very quickly into something that can be very transformational.
Wow. Yeah. That is a positive approach to go to the challenging side. And I was curious about some of the positive aspects, as what I absolutely share is the perspective that if you analyze for the last 20 years or 30 years, even CRM success and the
Yeah.
typical still alive problems, I would love to see an agentic coworker helping me in getting data cleaned, in getting data migrations done more easy. I
Yep.
would pay a fortune for this because I
Yes.
could sell it to other
Yes.
organizations
Yeah.
for tremendous amount of money.
Yep.
Having said that, what is the secret sauce an organization need to be redesigned to accommodate for the agentic world, such as decision rights, escalation threshold, approvals, human supervision? Name it and game it, and go into some more details from what you found
Sure.
out for the work of your book
Sure.
in the
Yeah.
research.
So let me start at the negative and move to the positive, because that's probably an
Yes,
easier
let's
way to
go.
see it. So what do I see when things fail the most often? Well, I would say there's three sort of basic ideas that lead to or could lead to failure. The first one, I've already mentioned it, but I'll say it very clearly: technology first implementations. In other
Uh-huh.
words, I'm excited. I got a new tool and I love this and I'm going to use this and it's going to do great things for my business. And I've completely ignored all the people and the use cases and, all these things so oops, that's not a good way to approach it, because it's not a technology first implementation. It's a hybrid workflow approach. The rip and replace is the second one. So and this goes back to what we were talking about with layoffs, right? It's like, oh, I put these agents in and I don't need these people anymore. Boom, done. They're going out there and they're solving my problems. And all of a sudden my customers are angry with me because
Hello,
guess
Klarna.
what? Right. And that's, rip and replace doesn't work in this. It simply doesn't.
Yeah.
You've got to go into this with this collaborative mindset, and that helps you get to the end result that you're looking for. And then governance free is the third failure one that I've seen a lot. In other words, this thing's great. I'm just going to deploy it and it's going to make decisions right and left, and whoo, here we go. And all of a sudden I'm in regulatory trouble and compliance troubles and customer troubles, and because we have to approach, I like to think of it as, and I just wrote something over the weekend about ethics, because this is the other thing that I'm really been focused a lot around: governance and ethics. Those have to be built in by design. In other words, I'm designing the whole thing with governance and ethics at the base, at the foundation.
Very
and
important.
all of those things are included in my implementation as I go forward. So those are the kind of three. But then if I shift that and I go, okay, well then how is it that I'm getting to a positive outcome? Clear value focus. So in other words, I want to understand the specific, not general, business outcomes that I'm looking for. Not cool technology, but business outcome.
Yeah.
So the metric's not I was 10x more productive by getting rid of these people. The metric is I generated more revenue because I increased margin because in other words, the value metrics are very different. They're focused. And I mentioned that one financial services company achieved 40% improvement in fraud detection rates by implementing an agentic system. That's massive. That's a big, big, big opportunity there. And that's having the right value focus. Not that I eliminated the people that used to do that, but that I actually got better outcomes. Human AI collaborative design. What does that really mean? I'm not replacing my human, so I have to design the workflows so that they're complementary between the digital and the human. So the predictive maintenance one I mentioned is a good example of that. The workflows. The professional services one too. The idea that I can use this to augment my consultants. I mean, there's some really good human AI workflows that work together, and I use those a lot in my business. I don't have an agent go match all of my transactions in my books automatically, but I do have it do that. But it does it on my instruction that it's time to do that. And then I can see the outcomes and know that it did the predictable outcome that I was looking for. So that, iterative capabilities, we mentioned those already. And then lastly, this idea of foundations, data infrastructure, technology integration. How is it going to, agents need to use tools. And how do they use tools? Well, today, MCP is one of the most, prominent protocols, but there are others. And if you have agents working together, you want, A to A or some type of an agent to agent protocol. All those things are foundational. We need to define them. But then also, don't forget, when you talk about foundation capabilities, I also want to do governance by design, ethics by design. So all of those things are built into that data layer, infrastructure layer, organizational change management, all those things. And in fact, data you mentioned, and that's one of the biggest things. And you and I both have been involved in CRMCX for a long, long time, and the data is not good. And we've known that for a long time. So the more we can get agentic AI focused on the data quality, data management, data consolidation and completeness, then the less I'm going to have to worry about that, because that is something I do want to automate away very soon. How do I find the data? How do I consolidate it? Can it be federated? Does it say where it does? Does it have to move? Data in motion is much more risky than data that's at rest. All those things I need to consider. And in fact, Salesforce buys Informatica. Why? Well, they're buying Informatica because Informatica spent a lot of time with Claire GPT and all the other automation capabilities they have around data. We have 180 Ops is a startup that I work with some and actually just had the founder and chief product officer on my show last week talking about their focus around data. And it's the same thing. They realized they were going down the path of sales ops and how they could provide better outputs for sales ops. And they realized, oops, the problem is not the output as much as the input. The data was bad. So they're focused now on data automation and helping you do it. So that's where you're going to see the real movement, I think, in the near term is how do I get that infrastructure together so that all of those capabilities are there and can really provide me with that capability to be successful with the implementation.
Marvelous. So there is a perspective that one day all the shitty data lakes, which are collected and thrown together, may get a cleaning up, a proper presentation, a proper cleaning, and then we will have the miracle of that you throw together 5 smelly barrels of shit and get a perfume out of it. That would be a dream, yeah.
Yep, it would be nice. I think we ended up with data cesspools instead of data lakes, and what we want are data lakes, right? So we got to clean those up, and now let's get them to the point where we can actually use them, right?
I'm having thought about the co-working space. What is changing not only at the desk you're working on? How will your typical new desk look like? That would one question be, which is quite interesting, as you exercise it and walk your talk and have probably now 5 to 10 screens on your desk, or simply 2. Yeah, that is what I'm curious about. And what would you suggest that the co-working strategy will impact hiring and recruiting? How would you suggest to do it properly? First the desk, and second the recruiting.
Yeah, well, the desk is interesting, and I'm a bad case example probably, but I have right now I have three screens running, and I also have a digital paper tablet that I use for notes and that sort of thing, because I have to digitize everything. So instead of the paper, I have digital paper, but the same function, right?
Yeah.
And I've gone with these big curved monitors because I need a lot of screen real estate now, which is good too, I think. Yeah. So that, I mean, I think, designing a place where you can work collaboratively with those digital workers, that I think that is, that's an important piece of it. And then you mentioned people, I would say that I see this, and I've actually been doing another survey project for another client, and it was about privacy in AI. And as I surveyed, and it was a global survey, I did a very high response survey. And it was interesting to look at the way people are starting to embrace this, and where we're starting to see it embraced, and how. And you can tell that. Interestingly, you mentioned small business. Small business definitely one of the places we see a lot of adoption. But underneath that, also emerging markets, companies in countries that we would probably say, oh, that's third world, or whatever bad word we want to use for it. I hate that term, but in fact, one of the most progressive AI adoption areas that I found was Nigeria. And Kenya was very high too. So, there's this necessity driven innovation, right? In their case, they don't have to overcome some of the problems we do, because they are at a point where they can leapfrog by going to this next generation technology. The same thing was true in infrastructure. Why build landline infrastructure when you could go to cell tower 5G infrastructure very quickly? You saw that in Africa overall, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think those are really important to think about. It doesn't play out equally across all those different areas. And there is some advantage to starting with some clean slate in some of these regions where we are seeing a lot of adoption. But I guess if I was talking about organizational redesign kind of at the high general category level, I'd say that you were clear about one thing, and this is important: decision rights, clear frameworks for what decisions digital workers can make autonomously, and which ones require human approval. It's not binary; it's contextual. It's in complexity, confidence, all those different things that'll evolve over time. But decision rights is important. Escalation thresholds: when do I need a human and when do I not? Supervision models. This one I love because there's not a lot of good systematic ways to manage your agents today, although we're starting to see some of those, because you actually sort of need a workforce management solution for digital employees, just like you have for human employees. So supervision models are going to be, that's going to have to be defined, and every company that implements this really does have to think about those, because those are high stakes for the company. When are humans involved? When are they not? What's routine? What's not? What do you monitor? What do you handle as an exception? And then lastly, new roles. When we talked about people, if I was giving advice to college students today, I would say ignore those professors that are going, "Oh no, AI is killing education," and learn AI, because guess what you're going to be doing when you get out in the workforce? You're going to be using AI, and you need to know how to use it and how to work with it. And so think of it as a collaboration tool, think of it as a coworker, think of it as a co-student even, and learn. Because when you get out in the workforce, that's one of the biggest gaps right now, is that capability to hire employees that already know how to do these things. I mean, think about the past, right? When I was at Autodesk, we built this whole education program that eventually went all the way down to the elementary schools. We had elementary school students playing with CAD tools. Why? Yeah. Because they learned, and when they got out in the workforce, eventually once they graduated college, they've been using CAD tools since they were, in fifth grade or something. The opportunity for them is massive, different than it was for those students who came out who had no idea what a CAD tool was. So I think this is going to be true with AI as well. And so I'm not a naysayer when it comes to education. I'm a positive, think of a better way to do this kind of sayer. Are there negatives? There's negatives to anything, but there's also a lot of positives. And as an employee, you're going to need to know how to do this. You're going to need to know.
So I embrace that approach. And having met Stephen LeMay several months ago during summertime in Frankfurt, we were discussing exactly how he is approaching with his students, such as he said, I challenge them regularly in the semester work that they try to build little groups and utilize up to 4 of agentic helpers to manage their tasks, and describe how they deliver benefits to their work, how they try to co-work with them, and what their experiences were. Because he is exact of that perspective. You need to know how to use it to their benefit to achieve your goals. Yes. What metrics and incentives should companies focus on when working with agents? What are your suggestions here?
Well, so you know which one I'm going to say immediately to avoid.
Really?
That's efficiency metrics, right? Because this is where we've got to go. And in fact, it was funny. I was reading something. They were talking about employees hated the rollout of generative AI in a lot of companies. Why? Because executives came in and said, "Here's this great new tool. I'm not going to teach you how to use it, and you're going to be 10 times more productive. So I just raised your quota." No, and that's a problem, right? So efficiency metrics aren't really the right way. Balanced scorecards, efficiency, quality, customer sat, employee sat, long-term value creation, those are important. Focus on outcomes. So rather than measuring how much AI we put out there, let's measure the business outcomes: customer satisfaction, employee engagement, competitive positioning, revenue, margin. All those things are important. Include learning metrics. So how is your company adopting this, building those implementation capabilities and using those capabilities? And then long-term value. This is not a quarter and done, right? This is a long-term investment, and it's going to become more and more capable over time. It's like any other workforce. You're going to invest in it, and you'll get outcomes and output from it that are going to be valuable, and that value increases over time, just like an employee, a human employee increases in value over time. Well, usually anyway.
And by this way, and by this attitude, you can also get into real manageable, measurable ROI
Yeah.
after a certain time span. That is
Yes.
something I like.
Yeah.
Coming to the end of the hour, it's the usual point where we ask the famous last words question. When and how to disclose agent involvement? What is the gold standard service recovery play
Mhm.
when an agent makes the wrong call? And how do you communicate it without denting the brand?
Well, I would say it goes back to what I said about governance and ethics built in. So by design. And then secondly, the watchword here is transparency. First of
Yeah,
all, up front, I want to know what you're doing with my data. So I want the company to be very clear about what they're doing with the data. And in some environments, like the EU, for example, where they actually have regulations, that the regulations need you would lead you to do that, right? You have to do that. But in other places where it's not required, it's still necessary, because as a customer, I want to know. As an employee, I want to know.
right.
Now, there are certainly workflows where it's not necessarily to upfront go, hey, you're talking to a bot, because you may not need to. You just need to have the capability to escalate up a path that gets that customer, employee, whichever one it is, what they partner, whichever one it is, what they need. And it's not a not telling them, it's a, do you really have to do that up front? Not necessarily, but you do want to make sure that it is transparent. And if they ask, you would say, yes, of course, I am an agent or whatever, and that it also is focused around that outcome, output, and you have the right metrics in place so that you're getting that kind of behavior from your people and from your agents.
Wow. Michael, thank you very much. That's our CRMKonvo for today. This hour just flew by and I enjoyed it very much. I hope the same
Thanks.
with our loyal audience, having been surprised by what our outcomes are and not placing so much questions. So we could keep our flow. And that's to our guest. And thank you very much, dear audience, for being with us this week. And again, Michael, thanks for your time and insight. And we will look forward to having you here again and going forward with the positive recensions and questions asked on your book and your findings. That will be a fascinating topic. So be aware and be sure that you get yourself a copy next Monday when the book is published. Tune in next week when we dive into what we had also as outcome based thinking, modernized customer journey management with our guests Mark Smith and Ray Gerber. So thank you
Thanks.
very much. Take care. And now I push the fabulous red button and say bye bye to our audience.